All right, Mr. Gil Carrillo, thank you very much for coming on to theboxingbar.com and welcome, my friend.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And Gil, just about a month ago, I was thinking of you. I was watching this documentary about East LA and how diverse it was back in the 30s and 40s and 50s and all that. And they had all these different types of people, from Japanese to African Americans to Russians and so on. And they were talking about how they all got along during that time. I know it's a little before your time growing up there. What was it like there growing up back when you were a kid?
No, I wasn't born and raised in East LA. I was actually born in 94. My first 5 years of my life, I lived at 94th and Avalon in South LA.
Oh, wow.
And then at 5 years of age, I moved to the city of Pico Rivera, where I spent the rest of my life growing up there.
Oh, wow. What was it like being raised there?
Well, there was no problems. The only problems they had were gangs versus gangs, Mexicans, all Mexicans. There wasn't, we interacted with Caucasians. We didn't have any blacks going to our school. There were no blacks in the city. It was just whites and Mexicans. And then in the early 60s, when I first started going to high school, they started having a little bit of racial tension. That was when the surf scene came on. And so surfers were fighting the Mexicans, and the Mexicans were, they're all fighting each other. But that ended 1 year into it, and everybody got along. There was no racial tension at all the last 3 years that I was there.
If it wasn't for going into the service, you think you would have joined a gang, back then at that time?
Oh, undoubtedly. There's no doubt. The cop that helped me out saved my life. I was hanging around on the corner with the boys, used to call themselves the Holbrook Boys, part of a clique off of Pico Nuevo, and we were headed nowhere real quick. He told my parents, sign for me to get off the street, so you go to prison. I signed. My parents co-signed for me, so at age 17, I went into the Army. And as it turned around, those that stood back on the block are either dead or in prison now. And those that went into the armed forces led a productive life after. So military was good.
What was home life like for you with your parents and your siblings and them? Were you guys pretty close-knit?
Very close. I had 6 sisters, and both my parents worked, so my only recourse was to hang out on the block with the boys once I got to high school.
From you and your sisters, were you one of the oldest, the middle child? Where were you on that?
I had four older sisters and 2 younger sisters.
When you went to Vietnam, I heard some of your stories that you told George on the podcast. What was it like, your experiences there in Vietnam? Was it something horrific like everybody says?
Well, I don't know what everybody says. I can only speak for Gil Carrillo. I won't speak for everybody else. Vietnam was a growing, learning experience. It matured me. It gave me a new appreciation on life, gave me a new outlook on life. Because what I saw over there were kids, 8, 9 years old, learning how to teach them how to use weapons so they could protect their own little village. We went out there, and all I did was fly the whole time that I was there. So you'd get up, you'd go make sure my helicopter was ready to rock and roll. We'd get up and we'd go. The first 5, 6 months I was there, I flew what we called slicks. That means I was either on missions for the day. I was either inserting troops into combat or extracting troops from combat, resupplying them, medevacing them, you name it, we did it. I even went on defoliating missions where we spraying Agent Orange to kill the rice paddies out there, because rice was supplying the enemy with food. So we were killing their food source. And every day that I came back, you'd go out and get your helicopter shot up, you'd get engaged in heavy combat, come back, patch up your bird, and if it needed to go into the shop for heavy patch-up work, that's where it went. If not, you just refueled, rearmed, got it prepped for the next morning, and you went back to your hooch, which were bungalows that we used to sleep in by the airstrip. And when you went in there, we had Armed Forces TV, which meant we had TV at night, and you'd watch the same. I remember there was a show called Laugh In. There was Combat and some other shows, and they'd show the same show 3 nights a week. They didn't have much. They just show it to you, and we'd watch it. We had a refrigerator in there, so they kept cold beer in there, and you just mixed it up with the boys. They had a club on base. You could go down to the club and drink like cocktails and drink, and have fun, just get back, get some sleep, and be ready for the next morning flight. And that's the way it was day in, day out. The only days you got off were days that your ship was down. And then I went to flying on gunships, and gunships were nothing more than a helicopter that had miniguns. Miniguns are they're mounted machine guns that put out 4,000 rounds a minute. And we had rocket pods on them. Some had grenade launchers on the nose. And all you did was go out and support the slicks. Those guys only have two M60 machine guns on them, the ones that the crew chief and the gunner fired. So you went out to fly support for them. Once in a while, they'd call you out and they'd say, okay, we have the enemy making an attack. We just need gunships in there. Go shoot them up. So we'd go out on a simple assault mission, go out and try and do what we did. And once again, you'd come back that night, rearm, refuel, and be ready for tomorrow morning's flight.
You being Latino, was there a lot of racial discrimination that you felt back then when you were over there?
No. Back there, when you're fighting, you don't care what color that guy's got your bag. You don't care if he's white, black, brown, yellow, green. You don't care. You need him. There were four people on board a helicopter, the ones we were flying, and every one of them played an integral part in staying alive. And you learned real quick, if you panic, you died. So you work together, you learn together, you sleep together. It's one very, very strong brotherhood. Matter of fact, I go back to reunions still today of guys that I flew with in Vietnam.
Just to throw a little bit of boxing in there, I remember all that stuff with Muhammad Ali and his refusal to go forward into the process and being sent because of his religious beliefs. Do you remember that time, and what did you think of his decision to do so?
Well, at that time, I didn't think very much of it. I was young, I was naive, and I was in combat. At that time, I was either already in the Army or I was getting ready to go in the Army, and I didn't like it. I had never heard of a conscientious objector. Now that I'm an adult and now that I'm much wiser, I have absolutely, how do I say this? It wasn't my decision to make, it was his. And I will never say anything bad about anybody's religious beliefs. If that's what he believed, then God bless him. He stood up for what he thought was right, knowing what it was going to cost him. And he did absolutely nothing wrong. When you stop to think about how many people ran to Canada because they were afraid of the draft, he didn't run. He faced it head on.
Yeah, and he paid a heavy price for it too. This might be a dumb question, but getting all this experience that you did going to war and all that stuff, did it toughen you up for the future and what was to come in your future career after?
No, it made me a better man. It made me wiser. When I got out of the Army, one of my goals was to go to college. At that time, that was 1970. At that time, I was naive enough to think that only rich white people went to college, and I wanted to go to college. I knew I was mature because I sent for my high school transcripts, and I was embarrassed when I looked at them. I obviously thought D stood for damn good, and F was fabulous. I knew I was better than that. I was just lazy when I was in school. I was no good, and I wanted to go to college. I wanted to do right. I wanted to learn, and I wanted to become a cop because it was a cop that saved my life. It was a cop that made me good and let me live the life that I've lived to this day. So I wanted to become a cop so I could give back to some other young man out there on the streets to help them out and guide them, be a mentor for somebody. And it worked out.
When did you start working for the LA Sheriff's Department, and what were your first few years like being in there?
I swore in October 1st, 1971. I went through the academy, graduated from the academy in March of 72. My first assignment was a jail. I worked Hall of Justice Jail, which was the oldest jail in town then, and worked there for 2.5 years, transferred to East LA Patrol. When I went to East LA Patrol, East LA was the gang capital of the U.S. at the time. I mean, it was notorious for gangs. Back before Geraldo Rivera was somebody, he rode out with me in a radio car when I was working gangs at East LA to do a 2-part documentary on gangs at East LA. It was an all-Mexican neighborhood. It was tough. The cops there at that time were good. They were tight. They were a brotherhood, just like I had when I was in Vietnam. and they watched each other's back. If you needed backup, if you called for one unit assistance, you'd get three. Just everybody took care of each other to make sure that everybody came home safe. We didn't have force issues. Nobody ever complained. There weren't that many issues where citizens said, "Hey, these guys beat me unwarranted." It didn't happen. I never got a complaint while I was there. And you have to understand that in law enforcement, at least that's the way it was. 90% of the community of East Los Angeles are good people, good law-abiding residents. Only 10% of the people are bad. Unfortunately, cops spend 90% of their time on the 10% of the people that are bad and don't get to interact as much with the 90% that are good. That was the nature of the job then.
Like about the early 80s, mid 80s, that's when Miami had a lot of, let's say, bad cops because of all the drugs that were running through there. Was that at all true in LA during that time?
In the 80s, I lose track of time. It was in I'd have to say the late 80s, early 90s. We had 18 members of our headquarters narcotics bureau that ended up being filed on and charged, went to prison because they were stealing money. And they weren't stealing drugs. They weren't selling drugs. But what they were doing, they were working drug dealers, high rolling drug dealers. They'd come in to buy drugs from undercover cops, and they'd have with them $500,000 cash. And they would take them to jail, and maybe only 200,000 made it to the jail, made it into evidence. The other 300,000, they might disperse amongst themselves. And the bad guys weren't going to rat them out because, it's not supposed to be their money. They don't know what it is. They're trying to beat the case. And nobody's going to complain about it because the bad guys aren't complaining, the drug dealers aren't complaining, and the cops aren't saying anything because they were stealing the money. And it wasn't until somebody, an angry ex-wife, wrote a letter to the sheriff's department and said, maybe you ought to start looking into these guys. My husband works narcotics, and he is paying child support and alimony. Yet he's got enough money to buy boats and riverfront property. And so they started looking at it, and they saw what was going on. And we did our own investigation, and 18 cops went to prison behind it.
How long were you an officer before becoming a detective?
I worked the streets of East Los Angeles in patrol. That's where I did my patrol time, pushing the black and white. Part of the time that I was there, I worked plainclothes, a gang unit. That it was an unmarked police car, or as a kid would call it, it's a narc car. It's just a four-door sedan with no black and whites and no red lights on top. And it did have a siren. Some had a steady red light we could pop up there on top, it was on the dashboard, or we had lights in the back window that would flash yellow and blue. So that's what I did. And it was my gang work at East LA that March 23rd of 1981, I was asked to transfer into Homicide Bureau where they were starting a gang homicide unit. So I went up there and worked strictly gang murders. If it was a gang murder, I was in the team that's all we did was handle gang murders. Did that for a little over 3 years. Then I went up they wanted me to work regular murders. And when I went to work regulars, I spent the next, 18 years doing that. From regular officer involved shootings, regular murders.
Just the other day, I was rewatching the whole series of the Night Stalker there. The timeline of the crime starts on March 17th, 1985, with the killing of Dale Okazaki. What do you remember? You being still like kind of young in the detective game, was this just another crime to you when you first got there, or did it seem a little more different about this case and all the other murders that you had seen prior to this?
Well, number one, there is no one that looks just like a regular routine murder. Once you start working murders, you look at all of them as if it's going to be a serial case. So you leave no stone unturned. You're processing the crime scene as meticulous as you can because you only get one shot at the crime scene. And there was nothing different about this one other than there was a surviving victim where the suspect actually, at that time, I recognized he made an intentional noise. He wanted her to see him as he approached her. He made an intentional sound so she turned around, she saw him. And then she put her hands up in front of her face. He pulled the trigger on the gun. The gun went off, hit her in the hand, but she was holding a set of keys in her hand. So the bullet had deflected off the keys, went into her hand, and didn't exit. But it was strong enough to knock her down. And the door was already unlocked to go into the condo. He went into the condo, and she got up, hit the garage door button, and then ran out the alley. She ran around the alley. She heard a second gunshot. She knew her roommate was inside. She went around the apartments, come around the front of the condo, and that's when he was coming out the front door instead of going out the garage. He came out the front door. He saw her. He was just as surprised to see her because he thought she was dead. And they played cat and mouse around a parked car that was there. And finally, she just threw her hands up in the air and said, "Don't shoot me again. You already shot me once." And he put the gun down by his side and walked away. Now, that in and of itself is different, because why is he allowing her to live? That's a witness after he's already shot her once. So that was the only thing unusual about the case, that first one.
From later on, speaking to Richard or anything like that, was that ever brought up? Did you ever ask why he would let like a witness off the hook in that way?
I asked him in particular why he allowed Maria to live. And something unique about Maria that we didn't know until after was she had a very striking resemblance to his sister. And so it vacillated between either because she reminded him of her sister or she was Mexican. You know, he went back and forth.
And that was actually on my mother's 36th birthday. She's a St. Patrick's Day kid. And then my dad died 4 days later after that. At what point, I don't remember, it's been so long, but at what point did the first sketches of this Night Stalker first come out? Those drawings that they would show.
Well, they came out. We had one drawn the day after Maria Hernandez went out. I can't tell you which one went out first because we had one drawn, LAPD had one drawn, and it wasn't until much later that they came out because we didn't know that there was a serial killer for certain. So I can't tell you when they came out, but there were a few of them that came out.
Is that a good thing for you guys when the media posts these pictures so people could be on the lookout? Or is that a bad thing because it kind of, detracts from whatever you guys are doing, or it could,
Well, it's impossible to say. It's impossible to say. We have an obligation to give as much information we can to keep the public safe. If we don't put that out and they say, "Hey, you knew what he looked like," and here he sitting right next to me at a dinner table and in a restaurant, and I didn't know it, and then he starts killing people, well, maybe we should have let them know. We let out pictures of people that we're looking for, and that's to help, number one, people out there that are alive, and number two, let him know that we're looking for somebody like this. We want him to be in fear.
I remember as a kid during that time, over a dozen of us would, get together outside and play hide and go seek until midnight, there in Oxnard. And, once our parents heard about the Night Stalker, we weren't allowed to go out when the sun started going down. We're the county on north of LA County. So I can't even imagine what all the people in LA County were going through at that time. What were you guys in the sheriff's office going through, during that time? And, what was each day like for you during those days while you were on the hunt for this guy?
My captain was saying that we were working 16 to 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it was an extremely stressful time during that time. Everybody wanted him captured. There was a bunch of pressure on us as individuals because I wanted him, because the sheriff, due to the fact that he's a politician, he wants him captured because it's making him look bad. Our peers, everybody wants him captured because he's just a bad dude. And number three, we have an obligation not only to friends, but to our families to try and protect them. And it was a very, very difficult, stressful time on the investigators. And that bears out on the Night Stalker documentary.
Frank Salerno was credited for capturing the serial killer, the Hillside Strangler. He was known to be the man. What did you feel at that moment when you heard you were going to be working with him? And, what were your immediate thoughts?
I was excited. I was very excited. He asked me if I was willing to work for him. He could have had anybody he wanted to. He was well known, well respected. He was a good man. He was the big Goomba, the Italian stallion. And I remember telling my wife, "Hey, Frank Salerno asked me to work for him." And she said, "And who's Frank Salerno?" I said, "Jesus Christ, that's Frank Salerno. You don't understand." It was a great honor to be asked to be his partner. And I was excited, as I'm sure any young investigator would be, even though it's a seasoned investigator, because he could have had anybody want. They'd let him have anybody he wanted. And yet he chose me. So I was excited.
At the time, whenever the news would report about a new victim, they would briefly go into detail and, just kind of say there's been another murder. He went in through the window or whatnot. But going through each crime scene, I mean, you saw everything that was, firsthand, all the bodies and all that stuff. Did you already have, like, in your mind that all these could be connected, the first, like, 3 murders? Did you know already it could all be one person here?
Well, I wrote a search warrant as early as April 10th, where I was linking a couple of child abductions and 3 murders as early as April 10th. But I didn't have a lot of support. There was not a lot of support, not only out of my own bureau, but in law enforcement in general, because I was a young detective, and you have to understand that you hear this word in Latin called modus operandi, and that's what the motive, how he did things. And serial killers normally do things the same way. And what I was alleging child abductions, both pedophilia, female and male, and I was sex crimes and murder, and the murders were done with knives, guns, shot, foot, manual strangulation, ligature strangulation, stab wounds, blunt force trauma. Everything was different. So his only consistency was his inconsistency. So trying to tell old cops that this is one guy doing it, it's a hard pill for them to swallow. And that was understandable for me. That didn't bother me because I knew it was difficult. I had the ability, I had the fortune of taking into advanced criminal investigation pertaining to sex crimes. I took 2 semesters from a professor by the name of Dr. Robert Morneau, who was a retired FBI agent who dealt in sex crimes. And he was a brilliant man, and he's the man that gave me the knowledge to work the case.
Of all the people or all the cases that you've heard of and worked through and all that stuff, was Richard the only one that kind of didn't discriminate, between men and women and old and young and, whatever race, he didn't care about anything? Was he the only one that was, like you said, inconsistent?
Let me put it this way. Criminal profilers, these are people that determine, when you're looking for a suspect. The FBI has a behavioral science unit in Quantico, Virginia. This unit, you send them all your information, and we have local profilers here now, and they read your reports, do everything, and then they tell you, okay, you're looking for a man that's 20 to 30 years of age, has done prison time, more than likely Hispanic or more than likely Caucasian, and they give you a profile of what this guy should look like. Well, that's all predicated on criminal history. When I tell you today that nobody in criminal history had ever done what Richard did, and there hasn't been a copycat, because everybody doesn't know everything Richard was doing. So to this date, we don't have any evidence of another serial killer like Richard.
The documentary, also, they talk about how the different law enforcements they were kind of they were clashing, or they would clash a lot. And I think we hear that all the time when people talk about, certain cases and stuff. Do you think they work together today better jointly, or is it the same as it always has been and they still clash all the time?
Well, I don't know, because I'm not working. I haven't been working in 13 years now. I can tell you during the Night Stalker case, there wasn't a bunch of clashing going on. We worked jointly with LAPD. LAPD and us had the majority of the cases. The Sheriff's Department had the majority of the cases, but LAPD had a few cases. And we worked very close with each other during the case, and it was a smooth exchange of information operation. The only ones that gave us a little trouble were the smaller agencies, Glendale and Monterey Park. They were holding back because they're small agencies. I don't know if they thought Big Brother was going to come in and take over or what, but they weren't forthcoming in the sharing of their information.
To all of us civilians, we at that time, we were like, when are the cops going to find these people? Hurry up. And what's their problem? Why aren't they catching this guy? And so like for you guys daily, especially you, Gil, going through, this and, daily looking for this guy and looking for all this clues and all this stuff, what was that pressure like for you personally? I mean, were you a different person at that time personally because of all the pressure people were putting on you, whether it been the civilians or your department itself?
The pressure is enormous. And when people sit there and say, why aren't they catching? This isn't television. This isn't a 1 hour, crime drama. It's not a 4 hour movie. This is real life. And we do it in real time. And we have people that are in real fear. And we have to worry about the case. We have to worry about potential victims, and we have to worry about our families. We have to worry about the executives on the department, trying to keep everybody happy and keep up with the work. There's an awful lot of work that goes with it.
Oh, yeah.
So you're under a lot of stress, and you become short. My wife in the documentary said, and we talked about it just the other day, a time where I had been called out, and I called her up at 7 a.m. She was at this time staying with her parents. And I said, why don't you wake up the kids and let's go out to breakfast and the kids are asleep. I said, well, wake them up. I know your parents are awake. We'll all go out to breakfast. So we went out to breakfast. We came home back to her parents' house, and it was 10 o'clock in the morning. We got back to her parents' house, and I said, okay, give me an hour to sleep because I got to meet Frank at noon. And she says, Gil, you can't keep going like this. You're going to kill yourself. And I said, are you going to wake me up or not? I was just angry because if you can't do it, I'll call the office. They'll wake me up. And I didn't even get my left shoe off when the office was paging me. I called them. They said, you got another murder. So I went right back to work right then. Didn't even get that extra hour sleep. So it was tough. I was short-tempered. Had no time for fooling around. It was all work.
The day that finally Richard's picture was released and he was captured there shortly thereafter. What do you remember about that day? The day that his picture was released there and, he was most likely going to be on the run.
Well, the picture was released actually on Friday, August the 30th. And we got him the picture about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. My captain came in and said, hey, I'm going downstairs. Let's see, Daryl Gates from LAPD, the chief of police, Brad Gates, the sheriff from Orange County, and I believe the chief of police was a guy named McCarthy up in San Francisco. I'm not sure on his name. And the sheriff, they're having a conference call in the sheriff's office, and they're talking about releasing the picture to the public. What are your thoughts? And we told the captain, if it were up to us, we're asking for 24 hours. Give us 24 hours and we'll have him in custody. And he said, okay. He said, because if you don't, you release it, then it's going to be a chase. And he knows who he is. He knows we want him, and he's going to be on the run. And so he went downstairs. He came back up about 45 minutes later. He says, we lose. They're going to release the photo. And so there's nothing we can do about it. It was released. I left the office probably about 2 o'clock in the morning with an informant. Drove around for a while. I dropped him off. Got home at 4:30. Me and my partner had agreed we'd meet at 12 noon. We needed to get some rest. So I couldn't sleep. I got back up. By 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm on the streets again. And that's when I got notified that he was in custody. And so raced on down to where he was at. And then it was game time.
When you first got the chance to actually see him and once he was in custody and you got your first words with him, what was that feeling like when you were finally going to approach this guy you've been, working for all these hours and, changing as a person because of this, and he's changed your life almost completely. What was it like actually facing him? It's kind of like, Like I tell you, I'm a boxing fan, and I'm sure it's like meeting your opponent there face to face before the matchup. What was that like?
There was no feeling for it at all. You say like an opponent, like a boxing match. I refer to it. You use a boxer. I use a pro football player for an analogy. Same thing with a boxer. That boxer is a dad. He's a friend. He's a fine-tuned machine, and he trains every day. But at night, he's still a dad, a father, or a friend. He may drink, he may not drink. I don't know, but he just goes along with his regular life. Football player, a Brady, a Manning, they do the same thing. But then when it comes to game day, as soon as they put on those pads, and they step into that arena, everything is out of their mind except for it's game on. I'm a professional, so now here we are. So when I went in that room with him, it was game on. I didn't give a bit about it. I knew about his satanic worship. I knew that he was a bad guy. I knew that he was a serial killer. I knew what he had done to kids. I didn't care. My focus was game time. My focus was to get him to talk as much as I could. That's all I cared about. There were no feelings. All feelings are at the outside. They're not inside that interview room. They're all left outside. You go in there and you do your job. That's all you do is you focus because you don't want to screw this one up.
And to all the listeners, I'm just kind of fast forwarding here through everything that Richard Ramirez did. We only talked about a few things, and I'll let them watch the Night Stalker docu-series on Netflix so they can see the rest of it there. When you did talk to Richard Ramirez and you finally talked to him one-on-one, was he kind of like what you thought, just another person, or?
All he was another human being, nothing more, nothing less. And I will add that he was one of the most articulate murder suspects I've ever interviewed. He wasn't that ignorant. He wasn't crazy.
Thinking of Richard Ramirez today, looking back, what are the things that stick out the most thinking about him, today?
Nothing. I don't think about him. That's a case. It was a high-profile case. It's gotten this Hispanic an awful lot of notoriety, but I don't think about him at all.
What were you doing when you found out that he died in 2013? How did you find out? Or
June 7th, 2013, I was at my grandson's junior high school graduation, and my daughter, who was a social media buff, leans over and whispers at me, "Dad, Richard Ramirez just died." And I said, "So what? Right now I'm here for my grandson's graduation. I don't care about that stuff." And within 40 minutes after my grandson's graduation, I don't know how many messages I had on my phone. I had interviews with, I think, Channel 7, Channel 5, Channel 4, they all did interviews with me on television. I remember the day, and all I could say was, well, he was sentenced to death. His appeals are now over with. And now you have to meet his maker.
The first time I talked to you, I told you I was going to be interviewing you for a boxing site. And you did bring up that you were a ring announcer at one time for a fundraiser for
yes.
the LAPD against the LA sheriffs. How did you get that?
Yes.
What was it like doing that back then?
Oh, I love doing it. It started at East LA Station. They had their own station right there. And they just had as recreation, I guess. There were about 6 guys that wanted to square off in the ring and over grudges that they had in patrol. So, hey, let's take care of it in the ring. So they put up a big show, for the local station. And they had an arena, and they got a bunch of people inside there, and they hired a limo to pick me up. I was in a tuxedo. I had ring girls in the car with me, and we went down to the fight venue, and that's where it started. And I enjoyed it. They thought I did a good job doing it. And so I did it for about 3 more fights. And pretty soon I was doing it for the Police Olympics. And then I started doing it for the LAPD Sheriff's Department fight. And then it started from LAPD to Sheriff's Department, the Marine Corps, Fire Department, New York. Cops came out here. And that led to a couple of pro fights. It was fun. I enjoyed it.
I don't remember if you said it was your dad that used to take you to the fights back then at the Olympic Auditorium.
Oh, my dad. I never went to the fights with my dad. My dad was a big fight fan. He used to go to the Olympic Auditorium all the time. And the first time I became a ring announcer where I was announcing the fights at the Olympic Auditorium, I had tears coming down because I remember my dad. That's where he used to go. I may have gone to one fight with him, but only one. But I was already a teenager or an adult by then. But he's the one who used to go to the fights all the time.
Man, I read about all those fights back then. I've even interviewed a bunch of fighters that used to fight back then at the Olympic Auditorium. What were some of his favorite fighters? Do you remember who he used to like watching?
No, I don't remember who he liked watching at all because I wasn't a big fight fan then as a kid. Until I started going to the fights as a teenager.
Many years back when I first started doing this and interviewing fighters and whatnot, there was a fighter from L.A. named Paul Gonzalez who actually won the 84 gold medal.
Oh, sure. I know Paul.
Yeah, 84 gold medalist there. And actually, I believe his mentor was, I don't know if he was it the LAPD or was it the LA Sheriff's, Al Stanky?
LAPD.
Okay, yeah, that was his mentor. Yeah. And I remember he brought him up and he said, because Al Stanky was his mentor, and after he won the gold medal, they gave him like a whole parade and stuff there since he was in LA and the Olympics was in LA there that year. He got that whole treatment there. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Paul Gonzalez, I saw him after when I was doing ring announcing. I'd see him at some of our fights. He'd show up. I've talked to him many times. I've seen many old boxers show up that were boxing back during that time. Ruben Navarro, who was a boxer.
Yeah,
Mondo
Ramos.
The Maravilla kid. Mondo Ramos. Mondo Ramos started fighting before he was even 18. And his dad, he was, and Mondo said he hated fighting, in the beginning.
He was a longshoreman. He was a longshoreman from Long Beach.
Yeah, and then there was another longshoreman, white guy. He had a brother, too, heavyweight.
Yeah.
Mike.
It wasn't Quarry.
He was a yes,
Quarry?
Jerry Quarry, and his brother was Mike. Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Last time I saw Jerry Quarry, poor guy, I felt sorry for him. I was already working. It had to be in the 80s or 90s. I was working Homicide Bureau already, and I happened to be over at one of our substations, Temple Station up here, working a case, and he was a trustee. He was in custody for something, and he was a trustee, and I walked up to him, and I said, Mr. Quarry. I didn't call him Jerry. I called him Mr. Quarry. I said, I'd like to shake your hand, and I'd like to say thank you. You gave myself and thousands of fans like me thrills just watching you in the ring. You were good, champ. Thank you for everything you've done. Sorry you ran into a stroke of bad luck, but keep your chin up. Protect yourself at all times. You know how to do it. And that was the last time I saw him.
Today you do a podcast there with George Lopez, man. It'd just be fun as heck to do that. OMG Hi is the name of the podcast. What was it like when you first met George Lopez, first of all? What was it like meeting him?
I got a phone call from a friend that said, hey, heard on the radio that George Lopez says, anybody know Gil Carrillo? Have him give me a call. I'd like to talk to him. So I did. He returned my call, and that led to a meeting. He wanted me to go golfing, and I don't golf. So he said, well, would you come down and have a beer with us? I said, sure. So I went down to his place to have a beer, and it's a very nondescript building where we do this stuff at, and it's in a residential neighborhood. You just walk in the front door, then you get inside, then you got to be buzzed in the rest of the way. And so when I get buzzed in the second part, it's a studio back there. And they take me into this one room. I said, where do I sit? And he just said, right there, right in front of the mic. So I sat down. He popped a beer. We popped a beer. There were four of us in there. We started drinking and just shooting the breeze. And there was no introduction. There was no, are you ready to record or nothing? We just started shooting the breeze. And in doing so, all of a sudden, I find, okay, that's it for the day. It's a podcast. And that was episode number 11. We've now dumped number 76. I think it was the last one we dumped. And I've done all but 3 or 4 of them with him. He now calls me his co-host. Well, the first time I went in there with him, Bobby Lee, who was a comedian from Mad TV, he's there saying, well, were you nervous coming down here? I said, you knew you were going to meet George Lopez. Have you ever met George Lopez? I said, no, I've never met him. And he said, were you nervous coming down here? I said, no, not at all. I said, George is nothing more than another human being, just like you. I said, was I excited? Yes, I was excited because I paid good money to go see George on at least four to five occasions. And now I'm getting to meet a star right here, and I'm going to be sitting down drinking a beer with him. Of course, I was excited, but not nervous at all. That's what started it. That turned into a friendship.
It's actually a cool mix, Gil, because you guys are kind of very different from each other, but yet I like your laugh there during his jokes and stuff. And, you know, you guys have that good chemistry, that good blend. And you guys could also tell that you guys are good friends outside of it. What's your favorite part about doing this podcast?
You know, I don't know if you've ever played softball or baseball. I played an awful lot of, in my adult years, I played an awful lot of softball. And for 2 hours and 10 minutes, that was the time limit on the game, I think. You'd go out there, and once you got on that field, you forgot about everything else going on around you. There were no more bill collectors. There was no more angry wife. There was no kids bothering you. All you thought about was baseball. Well, I go into that studio, into that room now, and I get in there with George, and every problem that I have in the outside world goes away. And all I do is sit there and shoot the breeze and laugh. It's like telling you, hey, let's go for a beer, and we'll be back in 2 hours. We go sit down there with two buddies, and we sit there, we drink, we shoot the breeze, and it's all over with. Then we go home. It was just fun. That's what it's like doing the George Lopez OMG Hi podcast. It's fun. I enjoy it. The drive home is terrible because I have to drive in traffic. But other than that, I love it.
And at the same time, it probably gives you something to do, and it keeps you young, and then you get to meet all these terrific guests. Who are some of your favorite guests that you guys have had on since you've been on there?
One guy from your neck of the woods, I think, Frankie, I can't remember he's the guy that does the Cholo.
Yeah.
Cholo Fit.
Yeah, he is from Oxnard.
Yeah, he's an excellent, nice guy, good guy, funny guy. When Oscar was on the show, Oscar De La Hoya did a good show. We just had a guy on there recently, Paul Rizzi, I think it's Paul Rizzi. And that guy was the funniest guy. I've never heard George laugh that much and that loud. When this guy was on the show talking about his dad in New York and talking about Geraldo Rivera.
Yeah, he's an Italian guy.
This stuff was, this is stuff that you want to say, but you can't say it in mixed company. You don't want to offend anybody. And that's one reason George has said on television why he likes doing the podcast, because he can say whatever he wants without being censored. And he doesn't worry about it. And he does say whatever he wants.
Yeah, it's really cool. And actually, I want to say last year, maybe it was, my kid's mom, she has a few kids of her own before me, but he's the one that actually told me when he brought up that you were on there. I remember said, yeah, that's the guy from, the Night Stalker case from years ago. And then slowly I got into listening to all these different episodes. I've seen probably almost every episode with you guys on. So I do remember seeing Paul Rizzi and Constance, who played the
Constance Murray. What a beautiful lady. Nice lady. Beautiful lady.
2 weeks ago, I went to visit my mom in Oxnard, and I go, first thing I'm going to do is go look for where I can find George Lopez beer, that beer you guys drink, because there's nothing up here in Northern California where I'm at that's even close, like where you can go buy that beer. And I go, man, I want to try that beer. What does that beer taste like?
I don't know. I'm not a real beer drinker. Matter of fact, that's the only place I ever drink beer. But it's good. Yeah. Normally, I'm a wine drinker. I've been through all the whiskeys. I used to be, during the Night Stalker case, I was drinking tequila. Oh, wow. But, I can tell you when I drink rum, tequila, vodka, then I was on Jack Daniels for a while. But now it's almost all wine except for podcast time, then it's beer. And I think he's getting out of the beer business, so I wouldn't look too much longer.
About 2 weeks ago, he was going to be in a place called Blue Lake, California, which is maybe 4 hours from me, like on the coast near the border of California and Oregon.
Wow.
I was going to go catch it out there because it was OMG Hi tour. So I go, I wonder if Gil's going to be there. And I was like wondering if you were going to be a part of it. And I almost kind of just hoping that, that you did and see what you guys did together.
No, no. The Oh My God Hi tour is him alone. I have nothing to do with it. And as far as his stand-up goes, no. I go see him do his stand-up. That's about it. I've seen him perform twice here in L.A. A couple of weeks ago, I was with a wife. We took a trip just to get away. Little husband-wife time for the weekend. We went to Vegas to see him at the Mirage. And he's going to be performing here in October in Ontario. And I'm hoping, I haven't looked at my schedule, I'm hoping I'm off because I told him I want to take my wife to see him. When we went to see him in Vegas, my wife got sick the night of the show. Oh. And so she didn't get to see the show. We ended up coming home the next day. And as it turns out, she ended up having, she wasn't feeling good. And she ended up testing positive for COVID after we came back. So she was isolated for a week in the room. She didn't get real sick. She just had cold-like symptoms and asymptomatic. So she was good. And she's all, she's all well now. And I didn't get it. So it was all good. I've already had it once, so I didn't, but I kept testing.
Earlier, you brought up that you were a ring announcer. You enjoyed doing that. And obviously now working with George, you've seen what he does. If he ever asked you to try doing stand-up or being a host of his shows or anything like that, would you be willing to do something like that?
One of the guys, a comedian that does writing for him, we've become good friends, Momo Rodriguez. And Momo and his people have saying, they tried to get me to do it. They said, hey, we'll write material for you, 6 minutes. And I told the wife said, nah, I don't think I want to see you do that. So I didn't pursue it. Well, the other day, not too long ago, George mentioned to me, hey, how about doing 3 minutes? Get up there for 3 minutes. And he said, we can write it. I said, I can do it. And so he's just so busy. Right now, every day he's working, he's doing his, he's got a new sitcom coming out in November. And they're already shooting it, they're filming it. And, it's going to be called Lopez versus Lopez. And on NBC, prime time. And he's busy. So he's got so many, things in the fire going on right now. It's tough to get him. I do just about anything George asked me to. George has been good to me. He's a friend. And if he thought I could do it, he asked me once if he thought I could act. He said, you think you can act? And I said, I know I could. Okay. I said, why, you want me to go to acting school? He said, no, not yet. Okay. That's all he says. And to tell you the truth, I admire the man. He's my friend. I'll do this as long as he wants me to do it. But if it were all go away tomorrow, so be it. It was a great run. It was much more than I had before I started with him. And I'm happy and grateful for what he's been to me and what he's done for me and how much fun it's been. But I'm not dependent upon him for life. I still have my family. I still have friends and grandkids. And I'm just an everyday dude, brother. It's hard. It's hard for me to mix. Yeah. I'm just an everyday, as people are saying about it, I'm just gente. I'm nothing special. And, George is a nice guy. And he's a good friend to me. But I don't hang around with multimillionaires. This guy's got bucks. I ain't got the feria he does. So I feel kind of awkward sometimes.
You're very right about that. I do notice, like that guy you brought up earlier from the Cholo CrossFit or whatever, Frankie. When he came on your show, and a few other guys actually that were on your show, he would ask them maybe we could do this together. He was kind of like offering them like little gigs or
Sure.
I used to think George was, hey, he's just a millionaire. He's living up in the hills and he's happy. But I think I saw that other side, bringing you on and just being an ordinary guy. And it seems like it's a for real thing,
Yeah, he did. We had a female guest. I apologize. I can't remember her name right now, but he gave her a slot at the Laugh Factory. We went down there and he gave her a get up on stage and do it. I went down to see her, and he just offered some guy, Sanchez was the guy. Last guy we did on the last podcast, should have dropped today, offered him a spot to do his work. Try to get him to work, maybe bring him down and do a part one day on his sitcom. So he does try and help if he thinks they have, it looks like if he thinks they have potential and their heart is right, he'll try and help them or give them ideas.
Well, Gil, thank you very much for coming on here, my brother. Thank you for, finally coming on here and letting us know a little bit about yourself. And, every time I think of you, I remember your name from back in the day. I bought that book, The Night Stalker, back in the 90s, and it was one of the first books I ever read, to be honest with you. From
Phil Carlo's book?
Philip Carlo, yes. And
yeah.
I remember, I think you did I don't know, was it an intro or something to that book?
I did. He did the intro. He wrote it, and he was thanking us. And the investigative part he got from myself and my partner Salerno. We did it all. To be honest with you, I'd never read the book. All I ever read was the part that I gave him to make sure that it was correct. Phil was a great guy, nice guy. Came down, met my whole family here, took him down so he could eat some Mexican chili. He said, "Oh, I eat it hot. I eat it hot." I said, "Come on, I'm going to turn you on to some fire." Took him down to my mom's house. She cooked up a spread for him. And he kept saying, "Oh, this is good," as his sweat was drooling all over his face. It was funny. And unfortunately, he passed away from Lou Gehrig's disease several years ago.
I did not know that. Wow. May he rest in peace.
Yeah. Yeah, he was a good man.
But I tell you, man, the first time I thought of you was because of that book, remembering all the stories and the fear I had for Richard Ramirez and when I was a kid and all that stuff. And, you were the hero in that book or in that chapter. I know on the documentary you bring up your father a lot. I'm sure you'll be very proud of what you were a hero for guys like myself, capturing this guy, like that little girl, Anastasia Hronas, that came on. And you captured Richard Ramirez, which was a boogeyman to us, and
sure.
I appreciate you for doing that. And you are a real Latino hero in my book. That is the reason why I asked you to come on, is because we need more heroes like that in the Latino community, and everybody needs to know what you did for us and that you are a real person. And
that's all I am. Just hint out there in the streets, brother. Happy to be around. And I did nothing on my own. I was always surrounded by heroes, good friends, and family.
Thank you very much, Gil, and have a blessed one.
Thank you for the invitation. It was an honor and a pleasure to do this for you.
Thank you.
Good
sir.
luck.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye-bye.